Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
Well, good morning and welcome to Newsline, live as always from the Newsfirst studios in Dawson Street in Colombo and broadcasting on TV1, which of course is part of the Capital Maharaj Group. Now then, in a sea of flooding and waters breaking banks and all sorts of calamities going on, we decided to invite a very appropriate person who's got all the necessary qualifications and expertise to talk about this current disaster we're facing. And that is none other than Mr. Karunasena Hettiarachchi, is the Secretary of Defence, and with a wealth of experience in irrigation and water matters. And hello there, and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Faraz.
We are particularly very much obliged by your presence here, and we trust that you are recovering, on the road to recovery, and you're doing well.
Yeah.
Excellent. Now then, Defence Secretary, a little bit of rain, or what seems like a little bit, I know it's not a little, a lot of rain over a few days has caused it's caused absolute havoc in various areas. Yesterday in the morning we had a report of 164 dead and nearly 500,000 people affected by this, and about 88 people injured and so on. So a real calamity. Why does this happen? Is it something that we can? Why does flooding occur? I don't mean the rain, obviously that's up to God.
Yeah.
But
I think the flooding is depending on the rainfall,
right.
And that's because when it floods to the catchment area, the water comes along the catchment and get into the streams, and it comes to along the river to the sea. So that is the normal course. When it is raining, if you can see, our catchment areas are devastated by man-made, incidents like clearing, cultivations, putting up houses, buildings, and so forth. When the catchment area is disturbed, the percolation of water into the water table reduces because it just flows on the surface of the soil to the river. There are two things happen with this, because it causes erosion and it is getting deposited downstream of the river or near any other lake or something like that. And the other thing is that it doesn't enrich the water table. Right. If it goes to the water table, water will be released slowly when we require water in the drought, dry period. Right. So that is what is happening in most of our catchment. That is why you can see frequent floods. So what one got to do, one thing to be understood here is that the flooding, the rainfall intensity is something to keep in mind. Right. If it is say 2003 floods we had in Colombo, it was about 300 to 400 millimeters within about 12 hours. That's a huge rainfall. And the system, or the drainage system, or the rivers, or the lakes, or the water absorption areas cannot cope up with that amount of water. It get flooded, right? But we have to think about, we have to plan for such eventualities. So the engineers are working out flood frequencies and how often it will come, and what's going to be the magnitude of the flood. So that is how we calculate the expected flood during a certain period. Right. There is another way that one should look at. We take the Mahaveli River. Yeah. Mahaveli River, you won't hear much flooding in that area.
That's right. Why is that?
Why? Because you have regulatory reservoirs upstream. Right. Now starting with Kotmale, and then we have at Polgolla diversion and Victoria Reservoir, Rantambe, Randenigala. All these reservoirs are having capacities to store water, right? So they store it and they won't allow that to flow to the downstream. Right. So because of that reason, areas won't get inundated.
Right.
Now we think about the other rivers which do not have much. Of course, Kalani, of course, we have Mausakele and Laksapana reservoirs. Those are very small reservoirs. That's not sufficient to regulate Kalani. Mahaway, we don't have anything. And Kaluganga, we don't have any reservoir across the river at the upstream level. Nilwalaganga, Ginganga, we don't have any reservoirs.
Right.
So when you don't have regulated reservoirs, there is a tendency that you get inundated when the rainfall is high. To another way of protecting these areas, one I said it is the management of the catchment.
Yeah.
If you manage the catchment properly, you reduce the surface runoff.
Right.
Right. Then you have the regulatory reservoirs to regulate the flow in the river.
Right.
Right. Third one is the flood bund, which you can see even Kolonnav area. We have a flood bund which was built during the Dutch period.
Right.
So by building that flood protection bund, it protects a certain area.
Right.
So these are flood protection bunds. You can see on the Kalani River, on the right bank, you can see Kalani right bank. You can see that, observe that bank, the bund all along the river.
Right.
Right. So these are the ways that you can prevent flooding. And we have been doing a lot of studies and recommended to the government to invest in building upstream reservoirs, which will have a dual purpose. One is it can regulate water flow. Second one, three advantages or the purposes. Second one is we can get water during the dry period for drinking water.
Right.
When the reservoir water is full, so we can release that water for domestic water supply. Third one is the generation of hydropower. So the three quite multi-purpose kind of benefit you have if you construct reservoirs upstream.
Right.
And the third one is the constructing flood bund, which we have in Ginganga. We have some flood bunds which are not sufficient for a magnitude of this kind of rainfall intensity.
Right.
And also the Nilwalaganga Matara, we have some flood bunds, protection bunds, as well as the pumping stations to pump out the flooding.
I see.
Right.
I see. Well, that was very detailed explanation, which is very good. And thank you for that. But I'm wondering, do we have the necessary resources in place to carry out, to ensure that these waterways are essentially unblocked, if they're blocked? But more than that, you also mentioned that, the building of homes and so on, and that becomes a planning issue. Is there a coherent policy that interacts with all sorts of things? One, with this need to make sure that flooding doesn't happen. Then part of that process is the, like you say, the developments, the current developments that are going on. Isn't there one system that fuses all these needs together so that...
Yeah, I think in Sri Lanka, our administration and the ministry structure doesn't help us to address this issue, because there are so many ministries in charge of water. We have the Mahaveli Ministry, we have the Irrigation Ministry, we have Water Supply and Drainage Ministry, you name it, there are few. And disaster management comes in between to look after disasters. So, but I think according to my knowledge, Disaster Management Ministry is looking into the prevention of disasters. That is the major thing. So the kind of thing I was telling you about the resources for developments in this area, the government should give a priority, because the devastation that we undergo during a flooding or a landslide is huge. And also if you do these developments of upstream reservoirs or flood bunds, we can minimize the loss of lives and the damages to the property, right? So we need to allocate certain resources. One of the good example is the Yarra River in Australia, Yarra River Management Authority, and also the Murray-Darling. Those are the two authorities in Australia. Australia is quite a dry country. They don't have that much of rain, but they manage their water accordingly, and they won't have floods. So, recently you had in Brisbane some flooding and all that, right? But otherwise, they are flood free and they have enough resources for a reasonable time period. As far as I know, in Yara River, they have a water stock for next 3 years.
Right.
So this is the concept we call the river basin management. The river basin management, we don't have such organization in Sri Lanka,
Right.
but we did some technical work with the Ministry of Mahaweli and myself as the Secretary of Water Supply.
Yeah.
And there was a committee appointed by the cabinet.
Yeah.
So we worked out a strategy to implement, and which has been submitted now to the Ministry of Mahaweli to take it forward. So these are the ways and means of reducing this one by taking into consideration the international experience.
Yeah. In terms of actual disaster relief, when disaster happens, obviously the lead role is played by the disaster management, the ministry, for these things. But we always see that the tri-forces or the forces, including police, are called in, and the response time is extremely fast. Now, that's obviously because of the training of the force and so on. But in this case, for example, Defence Secretary, when this first flooding alert started coming through, it came from, I think it came in Ahmedabad district, from Walasmula. And the army were able to deploy very rapidly. So in that context, it's a pretty good thing that the army have their camps spread around the country. So my question to you is that there is a difference between fighting for land, to hang on to land, to house the army, and then there is this desire of the people who, the minute something is beyond the work of the police, the next second people say, well, where's the army? So if the army was all concentrated in the one place, you might have a challenge to respond. So my question is, how's the fight going on between the need to retain land, because you need the army, and the need to return people's lands or compensate with them?
Yeah, I think we had a fresh look at the occupation of the lands by the militaries recently.
Right.
And also, even I think maybe Friday or today, I signed the papers to appoint a committee to look into the land utilization by the militaries, right? Because we want to have a good understanding why we need that extent of lands for the militaries, right? So if you take the story in northern area, the politicians want the army to go out of northern area.
Right.
So which we don't agree with that, because army got to be everywhere.
Yeah.
Because we need to mobilize them for an emergency like the flooding or natural disasters.
Yeah.
Breach of security, the police should be reinforced with the military.
Yeah.
So that is why we have to have army spread all over the country.
So that is a measure, a strategic measure, to ensure the continued security of the people.
Yeah, now for instance, recently we lost quite a number of lands for development. They acquired the gold face, and the army had to move into various places. Now they are in bits and pieces everywhere. So when our most of the troops are now located away from Colombo.
Right.
So we need to at least to have about 2 to 3 brigades in Colombo, just like the recent garbage dump Mitaramulla, right?
Yeah.
It collapsed, and immediately we managed to do it because it was on a holiday.
Yeah.
We could get down the militaries from various other distant places. So likewise, every city, every place, there should be the army deployment should be in the close vicinity, so that they can do the immediate response.
Right. And the army is certainly the Army, Navy, Air Force are always in a state of readiness, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like a well-oiled machinery. ready to go, and that's the way it should be. So, but one thing that we notice as a media organization is that, people are told through the media, through the newspapers and radio, that the government wants them to evacuate, move away, because there's a danger. But what they're not saying, Defence Secretary, is where do they go to? We find it singularly lacking, and they say when people are being asked to evacuate, fine, so they evacuate. Where do they go to?
Well, I think that is a question to be answered by the disaster management or any other organization. But with my limited knowledge on this subject is that they should identify, disaster management should identify the evacuation centers and locate them, plan them properly, so that the people can go to. There are so many disasters that we can expect. One is the floods, other one is landslides.
Yeah.
So these are the two cases where people will have to evacuate to a safer place. So the high grounds, they have to find high grounds and a place to live, because this flooding situation you always associated with rainfall, right? So they need some shelter, right? Otherwise the people get sick and the children will be affected and so on. So therefore I think we need to have a comprehensive integrated plan for the disaster management ministry, how they should handle such situation during a flood and in case of a landslide. Landslide, of course, the warnings is being given by the NBRO, which is National Building Research Organization. I think they have identified certain areas when it is raining, that those areas are vulnerable for landslides. So it's not a very easy thing. It's not a very how do you call it, very simple equation to answer that question. But I think the planning, properly identifying areas, is something that the Disaster Management Center should look into.
How much of a dent has all these operations taken on your budget?
It won't be a big problem, right? Because our militaries are being paid, right? There is no additional expenditures. Only thing is perhaps the transport cost and sometimes the provision of food for emergency needs, right? That we have to do. Otherwise, we normally can manage within the allocated budgets. But if you have so much of disaster now, helicopters these days, every day it's about 10-15 helicopters are flying to take VIPs, as because they need to do some inspections, and the other thing is to transport food and other equipment, and also the rescue people to be taken into those places. So there will be some problems in latter part of the year, whether we have enough money for the Air Force and the Navy to operate. In that case, we can request the government to provide us additional funding for this.
Right. Talking about additional funding, are you like a child on Christmas Day, which you get all your presents and you're sure? How easy is it for you to raise money? That's all I'm asking you.
For raise money for us?
Yeah, for your expenses, you say.
Yeah, I think we have no way of raising money because we don't do any business. Right. So what we have to do is we have to ask the treasury to provide us money.
Are they amenable? Do they give you all the money?
I think they got to do it because we have fulfilled the requirement of the government, instruction of the government. We have done all the job to satisfy the people as well as look after our own people. So we have done our job, and it is a matter of money. That of course we can sort it out with the government. There is no problem.
No, there's no problem. And how is it going amongst the claims being made that in Sri Lanka, this is a claim made internationally, but obviously perhaps from the diaspora, that the Sri Lanka army or the Sri Lankan forces are continuing to accumulate a lot of influence, and so much so that it has come to a point, according to what they say, these claims, that they're not working as fast as the government would like them to, in terms of the release of lands, for example?
Well, I think the release of land is not a thing just like you just go and buy something from a supermarket, right? It needs a lot of work we have to do, because we have to think about where are we going to take these military personnel if we are going to release that land. And we need to construct buildings to accommodate them. Sometimes certain military installations are not only accommodation but also other equipment and things like that. We have to fix them there. So therefore, I think we have released, if I can remember correctly, we have released nearly 80,000 acres of land last several years.
That's
right.
That's the information I have here too.
Yeah. So that is quite a lot of lands, which we are occupying. But we need certain, extent of lands for the militaries, Army, Navy and Air Force for strategic reasons.
Yeah.
But the situation here, we cannot say we have defeated terrorism, but still the ideology is continuing. And there are some people creating problems here and there. The military got to be in those areas to look after the national security.
Right. There is no truth in it. If we say it shortly, the army is doing as the politicians and the president wants them to. And there is no issue that the army is working on a time frame of their own.
Not their own, because the military and the ministry, together with the political leadership, we have discussed about the land release. And we have prepared a plan. That plan has been submitted to the authorities for their, onwards, work. So we will be working on that agreed plan.
I see. Now that we're coming towards the end of our program, and I want to ask you, Defence Secretary. Okay, the heavy rains, that's an act of God. But in your experience, with your particular experience, in the water sector and irrigation and so on, and you're a technical man, you're an engineer, what would you do in an ideal scenario to reduce this flooding? So now we have a situation in Colombo where people in Etukote have told me that after the water's edge was returned to being a sort of catchment area for water, they don't have flooding in their area. Somebody from Palawatugoda said that they've put in artificial lakes, now we don't have flooding there. So these public actions that are taken for the greater benefit of the public in these two cases seems to have worked. So in an ideal world, what would you do to reduce flooding?
Well, I think I explained to you, one is you have to have a very efficient drainage system, right? Our drainage system is totally dependent on the gravity, right? Many developed countries, they have the gravity plus pumping. So we have a zero pumping. With zero pumping, you cannot, look after the entire drainage water. So therefore, we have to have a couple of pumping stations, to particularly in the Colombo area, to manage the flood. So Vellavatta we have, Devala Canal we have, and one outlet near Kalani River. We have all these outlets, and they need some kind of pumping to manage the inundation, right? So as you said, the construction of reservoirs upstream in the catchment will reduce the inundation for the flooding. So that is one thing. And I was telling you about the regulatory reservoirs in the rivers. Those things are the strategies that we can. And also we can put up some flood protection bunds so that that area will be protected, because that water will not overflow to the protected area.
And I think, don't you agree that provincial councils and so on need to be aware when they are giving planning permission and so on, to be aware of the wider picture?
This is a very, very long story. If you are going to take, you need a lot of time to explain, because some people, the flood level, if you take a particular area, let's say that Lake Drive area, It is the flood level of 25-year return period, right? Technical people can understand, but 25-year return period means within 25 years the most maximum possible flood, right?
Yeah.
So then you have to have at least say 2 meters above the mean sea level.
Right.
So then you have to build houses above that level, right? If you construct it at 1.5 meters or 1.7 meters, definitely you are going to go underwater.
Right.
So the one of the criteria that the local government institutions should look after is when they are giving approval, the DPC level or level of the foundation should be given. This is 2 meters or 2.5 meters. If you construct below, they cannot give you the COC, right? So that way people can be protected. People are also should be mindful. What is the general natural, the indigenous knowledge of flooding in this area? So they should keep their foundation quite high, and they can avoid flooding, right? So quite a lot of measures that all the institutions, local government, urban development authority, land reclamation corporation, irrigation department, all these people will have to take the responsibility and do a good job of work so that we can minimize future flooding.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Defence Secretary, for being on Newsline. We really do value your presence here, and we hope that you will come back on a program before a new chapter opens up in your life. On that note, thank you very much,
Thank you.
Mr. Hetjarachi. It was a great pleasure having you here. And that's it from Newsline. We'll see you again, same time, same place, tomorrow morning, helping you stay connected. Take care and God bless.